this topic of harmful emotions. And I think the topic itself we need to address. And what I think in the sense that we talk about emotions, but here we're talking about harmful emotions. And so let's list some of what are typical harmful emotions. I mentioned two already. I said we have fear, and I guess worry you could put in there as well. And I said we're going to address later anger, but that's just the beginning. I'm going to ask you, let's add some to this list. Anybody can think of something. Jealousy. Oh, yes, that's yes. That's a good one. Any others? Anger. Oh no, we're going to do anger. Anger for sure. Anger, jealousy, fear, worry. What else? Envy. Yes, envy. That's a good one too. That's a good one.
Loneliness.
How is that? How?
Yes, because when you are lonely.
Loneliness is well. You're right. You are right. That's right.
They hurt your emotions.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You know, if we think about that, it's not obvious, but that's true. That's true. It's a good one. That's a good one to add.
Ego.
Okay, now this man is jumping ahead. He says ego, and but you know that is actually you might say, just to jump ahead. We're going there because all of these are going to embody to some degree on that one, ego. But let's keep that list just there for now, because we're going to probably, as we discuss today, some others will come up, and you can draw a line under it because you have room to the right there that you can add to it as they come up. Now the question comes up now, we'll start another list here. The question comes up, why might these be classified as harmful? They're emotions, but emotions are emotions. You have other emotions too. We're not going to list. I mean, there's all sorts of ones that maybe we wouldn't consider in common parlance harmful. But why makes these harmful? I'll start the list. Just a few, perhaps, things we can add to this. Well, one is they rob us of happiness. Usually. Now, for every one of these, your mind, if you're a skeptical sort, your mind goes back and forth balancing. You might think, well, I can think of an exception. But generally, let's say, they rob us of happiness. They're disharmonious. They separate us, usually, all of these things. They separate, in some way, there's separation from other people involved in it. They tend to degrade relationships with people. They tend to, let's just look at biologically, they tend to stir up the body. The interior body is secreting all sorts of hormones that are going into the body when we feel these emotions. Tension is there, usually. Maybe not for loneliness. Maybe no, that may be not true. And then the heart oftentimes will begin to, as you could see, these have physical effects. They have psychological effects. They end up causing social effects for us. In all these ways, they start to degrade our happiness, is what's happening. And so in that sense, if you could say, if we define happiness, or if we define a state of upliftment as something that we all want, because I think this is a basic premise of being human, is we all want happiness. We want bliss, we want joy, however we choose to call that. We want that. These emotions tend to degrade it, and they take us in the opposite direction. And so you could say those things, if we look in our life, we could even ask the question of ourselves, is this going to is this going to make me happy? Or is this going to ultimately make me sad and make me depressed or go in the direction I don't really on a deep level want to go in? This is a basic measuring stick, you might say. Now, an interesting thing, my friend here jumped toward this topic of ego. Ego is something that also comes into play on this. Now, in yoga, what we define ego as, and we share here these teachings of yoga, teachings of Yogananda, ego is defined as this inner soul of who we really are, attached to the body, attached to the personality, to those things that change, who are not really. And that attachment to the body is what you could say is the definition of the ego. The soul attached to the body, misidentified, you might say, and it finds itself limited. It finds itself identified with outward things. And to the degree that we end up feeling these harmful emotions or stimulating those harmful emotions, yes, we end up finding that ego is being stimulated in all of those. But you'll also notice that those things, if you're very aware and you look within, you'll find that those things that release you from attachment to this body, attachment to limitation, attachment to ego, those are usually the things that really make you happy. And so you find that those things that pull you into this identification with ego, with the body, with limitation, depression, sadness go with it. Those things that free you from those things, that release you toward happiness, toward upliftment, those things tend to be things that you want and you aspire to. And they tend to be associated with emotions that are not harmful, that are actually things that we want, that are, you might say, more of our natural state. And so you have this dichotomy, this directional measuring stick. When we look within ourselves, is this going to take me in this direction or it's in that direction? Now it's directional. There's not necessarily absolutes in all situations, but where you are right now, does something, does a feeling, does an emotion, a reaction to life, does it take you toward your happiness, or does it take you toward sadness? Does it take you toward identification with limitation in the body, or does it take you to a sense of freedom? That's the basic dichotomy that we're going to be speaking about today. And so what we're going to do as we speak today, we're going to then create a third list, which leave a little space for the why harmful, because we may add a few. We're going to add a third list of things that might be helpful, or things to be aware of, things to watch out for in our discussion of harmful emotions, and perhaps more importantly, those things that might be solutions. And so that's what we're going to be exploring that today. Now, I want to start that exploration with a little story, another story, that we have, Ananda Sangha has an ashram in California. And in California, at our ashram, it was started by Swami Kriyananda in 1968-69, and we have a school there. There's a population there at the ashram and in the neighborhood of a few hundred people, and many of them are children. He's waving at me. No, he's not waving at me. Okay. And at this ashram, we have a school. And a lot of the young children come up, and they come up there, and we have a school for them. Sometimes we've had as many as 60, 70, 80 kids in the school. And there was an incident that happened that was very instructive. it was in winter time there, and because this ashram is in the lower elevations of the mountains, it snows from time to time. And whenever it snows, if you remember back to childhood days, if any of you lived in areas where snow comes, it's exciting. When the snow comes, you can't keep the kids in the class. Kids want to run out in the snow and they want to play in the snow. And one of the first things they do is they start making snowmen. They start making a snowman and they all rolling the snow up. And so this was happening there within the class, one of the classes. It was a small class, 10, 12 kids, I think, or so. And they went out and they made a snowman. Well, almost inevitably, I can guarantee you another thing happens very soon. Anybody think what happens next? What?
It will melt. It will melt.
Well, it'll melt, but what do the kids do, though? After they finish making they start throwing snowballs. And it does melt. but they start throwing, it's almost inevitable. And so they built the snowman, they were all having fun. The next thing you know, snowball fight starts happening. And then some clever people, they start really packing those snowballs tight, because they hit harder and you can throw them better. And sooner or later, also inevitable, somebody gets hit with a snowball, they start crying, they get angry, kids start, big commotion, and everybody's yelling and screaming at each other, and very disharmonious. And so that happened, and so at the end of that play period, teacher brings them back into the classroom and says, now let's sit down. Now, let's think about what happened here. When we went out there, we were all working, we were making a snowman together. Everybody was happy, everybody was fun. It was really great. And the kids would say, yes, that was fun. We all had a good time. Now what happened? What did you feel next? We started having the snowball fight. And the kids began to recognize, oh, that wasn't very fun at all. I thought it just didn't work out. I got mad at so-and-so. And they went through this whole scenario of what was happening inside themselves in these two very opposite situations. And the teacher, of course, she was very perceptive, said, see, yes, now you have a measure. How did you feel? They said, oh, I felt good. Then I felt bad. Very simple. Now, children, they were young children, they would not understand something more sophisticated. So she didn't go more than that. How did you feel? And this in our school, in that school, is very particular about, as children are raised, is to teach children how to be emotionally aware. It's a basic principle of education that is not often taught in schools. And parents, to some degree, do teach it, but it's somewhat inadvertent. But it's the art of learning emotional intelligence. And it's something that should be taught in schools, but usually isn't. To be emotionally aware of how one feels in the performance of various things in our life. Did you notice that? Oh, yes, I did notice it. How did it feel? In which way was it making you feel? Was it making you happier? Was it making you sadder? In which way? And this is a basic skill, usually best taught, in our experience in schools, best taught when the children, before they become teenagers. Now you have to continue, of course, but between the ages of 6 to 12 usually is when children start to attune themselves to their emotions. They start to bring their emotions a little bit more in control. They become aware of them. Now those continue when they're teenagers, but it's tougher, you might say, to get, because other things are happening at that time. So it's something, if you have children yourself, is to be aware of that, is to make them attuned to their emotions. Because there is a basic principle in yoga, but it's a principle in life, really, that awareness, and we can write this down, awareness precedes control. You cannot control something unless you're aware of it. Very difficult. And so the first thing you might say that we need to do, if we're talking about harmful emotions or any sorts of emotions, is learn to be self-aware of the emotions that are taking place within us. And if we start to become aware, we begin to see in which direction are these emotions taking me. Now there are two, you could say just in a very general sense, there are two basic directions. There's upward and there's downward, okay? But at the same time, in yogic terms, you sort of can write this down somehow also. It's also inward versus outward. So the dichotomy would be a directional, if you can learn to identify inward and upward versus downward and outward. And in a yogic, from the yogic perspective, we would be saying outward into identification with your body and the senses and your primal self, versus inward and upward of interiorizing, centering yourself and directing life force or emotions or feelings up to the brain. You see these two basic directions. Now, some people have the misunderstanding of yogic teachings because we say, oh, just be centered, be calm, and don't let anything bother you. And the idea is, or to overcome your feelings, emotions. And some people think that means, well, don't feel anything. Just sort of be impassive. Nothing bothers you, and you don't have any feelings. And that's not true at all. It's how you direct those feelings, because the true practice of any spiritual tradition is to help us feel more deeply, but inwardly and upwardly, as opposed to outwardly, downward and outwardly. Now this comes to a little bit of discussion when we're talking about emotions, in order for us to come to an idea of how we might find solutions to that, is if we look simply at the physiology of the brain, how it works, we find there are two basic systems in the brain. There's that side of that primal brain, that is fight or flight, fear, anger, reaction, not thinking. Those types of things are in a deep, you might say, lower part of the brain, central part of the brain. It's known as the limbic system. And those things are controlled. Emotional reaction is controlled from that. Now, you could say, why are they harmful? And adding another thing to our list up there, one of the things that happens when we have harmful emotions is our judgment becomes clouded, or it takes a walk and it goes away. Is what happens. You just get angry and you don't think, you don't consider, and and when that happens, you're open to doing all sorts of things. Sometimes you're lucky and maybe you do the right thing, but lots of times you're not, because you're driven by more primal feelings. So consequently, you have these two parts of the brain, this animal part of the brain, this basic part of the brain, fear, flight. And when that, if the tigers pops out on the path before you, you just automatically react. The body is flooded with hormones, adrenaline, you're up that tree as fast as you could possibly go. You don't think about it. You don't have time to think. So you don't consider. Now that's great if you're facing tigers every day. But it comes a time when we don't face tigers every day. And yet that tendency is still there. And what do we do about it? Now there's another part of the brain as well. And this is, you might say, the prefrontal part of the brain. The more evolved part of the human anatomy is the frontal lobes of the brain. Now if we had a good artist here, you draw a picture of the profile of the head with the brain. Let's see what she does. But and I didn't warn her, so you have to be very forgiving. But what you have is you have this prefrontal part of the brain, and centered there is that those elements of our physiology that are more advanced. You have, that's good, and then the frontal, so you would have, let's say down here versus up here. I suppose this is a nose. You have this more advanced part of the human anatomy, and this part, this frontal part, these prefrontal lobes, that element of the brain that allows us to consider, to be able to discriminate, to be able to decide, is this a good thing, bad thing, what am I going to do, to be able to evaluate. And so consequently, to the degree that we are living and centering ourselves out of that base level, we're going to react in a certain way, and you find that harmful emotions, to a large degree, have their base, and they're motivated out of the deep primal part of the brain. Whereas those things that are generally considered more inducing of our happiness tend to come more from the frontal part of the brain. And so if we could think up and either down and up, you could think of it in terms of the brain itself, which part is being stimulated. And you'll find that there's a general up and down dichotomy also in the brain. Very interesting thing is you can notice in your own life is whenever you feel happy and you feel joyful, you tend to inhale and you tend to straighten your spine. Oh, that was great. You look up maybe. There's an upward movement of your body itself versus a downward flow of the body position, the body posture. There's a downward movement. And it's even reflected in certainly in the English language to some degree. I'm depressed. I'm low. I'm feeling low today. I'm feeling down today, rather than I feel really up today. I feel, and it's reflected in body movement. It's reflected in language, and this is important for us to be able to learn this emotional intelligence, for children actually to learn it, and to be able to use a measuring stick for when we act. In which direction are we going? And control is preceded by awareness, learning to be aware of ourselves. Now this you could say is one of the to be able to see and feel and become aware. That's the first step, but then you have to be able to learn to actually do something about it. Well, one of the things is all of us, I'm sure, at one time or another have gone to the movies. Maybe we go regularly. Now, why do you enjoy the movie? Now, here you're at the movies, the hero, something terrible is happening to him. He's and you're in there with them. Something's happening, and you become engrossed in it, but you enjoy it. Now, why? Well, it's because that's not really you. But you can allow yourself to enter into that movie, but yet it's not really who you are. That's not who you are. You're something else. So you are watching it happen and participating even to some degree in happening it, but yet as it needed, you step on out. Why not take that very principle and watch the movie of your life? Right there, if we could learn to be able to detach ourselves a little bit from this movie and see it in a little bit of perspective, we would find that very, very soon we could enter into it as we wish, but yet it's not us really. And on a deeper level, it's us in a certain way, but not really who we really, really are. It's something is happening. Swami Kriyananda had this very nice phrase he would use. He said, a situation would be happening, perhaps there'd be a meeting, and there'd be lots of discussion. He would say, let's step back, step back. What is trying to happen here in this situation? To be able to step back is what we want to be able to do with our lives, to be able to step out of it and to detach ourselves from that immediate reactive process that is taking place when we find ourselves subjected to harmful emotions. That tendency to just immediately react is what gets us into so much trouble. But if we could learn to just take a step back and watch the movie, and there's always, you've heard this thing of, oh, if you're angry, and just stop and count to 10 and then proceed. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, because what we're doing when we do that is we're interfering with that reactive process. We're stepping back and allowing a space of time to interject itself. And when you have that little space of time, you find that you can then consider. You're allowing the frontal part of the brain, that part that makes decisions, that considers, you're giving it a chance to be able to respond. So you could say this is one of the very first things to do, is to be able to learn to interject that little bit of pause into your reactions. And you'll find that you can become a little bit detached from it. Now, of course, we here, I'll be bringing this up again and again during the day, but one of the basic tools that we teach, and this is why it's becoming popular, these more and more popular, it's always been popular to some degree, is why people learn to meditate. Because it's the basic principle that happens when people learn to meditate. Yes, a person becomes calm, they become centered and so on, but really what's happening also is they're learning to watch the movie, to step back and not to react. You then, if you're not going to react, you give that little bit of pause, and then you can consider. That is called to be responsive. We want to learn to respond to life, not to react to life. And this is the one of the basic foundations of learning reaction response. Is one of the basic principles of learning to overcome harmful emotions and to learn to be responsive to life, not reactive to life. And when you're not reactive to life, what happens is you no longer are flooding your body with the chemicals. Imagine you were to go into an emergency room. You have an accident, you're taken to the emergency room. A doctor comes out and they begin to work on you. They call that, they have in hospitals, they often have what is known as emergency response teams, that they come out or there's professionals who come, first people on the scene of an accident, EMTs, they're sometimes called emergency medical technicians. They are trained to respond to emergencies. And so are doctors and nurses. They're trained to respond to an emergency. They are not trained to react to emergencies. Because when you react, you're coming from that lower part of the brain, you're flooding your body, and basically, if you were to go to a doctor, do you want your doctor to be on drugs? No, of course not. Well, in the same way, if we want to be responsive to life situation, get off the drugs. Don't be drugged. And that's basically what we're trying to do, is get off the drugs and be able to make a considered response to what's happening in life. And that's what the basic difference is. And if we can find ways to do that, we're going to find that we're going to be much more effective in dealing with harmful emotions. The other thing is I think in the principle here, and when you learn to be aware of your emotions, you might say one of the harmful emotions we can add to the list here is guilt. People feel guilty. Oh my God, I'm such a bad person because I got angry, or I'm envious, or whatever it is. That's a harmful emotion too. We're not, if you can remove yourself, who is guilty? It's this little self-identity, this little ego self that identifies with that guilt. It's just to observe it. Something happened, now I'm going to do something about it, and I'm going to try to improve my situation. That's what we're saying here, is we're trying to take us to a position of being able to act responsibly and effectively. There was a situation that and didn't happen to me, it happened to a friend of mine who was in San Francisco riding on the bus. And on the bus, there was a blind man. There was a man. It was crowded. It was rush hour. He was standing in the center aisle and just holding on. And it stopped and came onto the bus another man. The second man had a white cane. Now, you know, when a person has a white cane, that means they're blind. Blind people often carry a white cane. And so he was finding his way on the bus, and he ran into the first man on the bus, and he just banged right into him. And the first man turned around. He was very angry. He says, "Why don't you watch where you're going?" And everybody on the bus was watching this. And he says, "Why don't you watch where you're going?" And then he stopped, and he looked, and he saw, this fellow's blind. And then he felt embarrassed, because obviously not very appropriate to say that to somebody. The blind man couldn't. He had a disabled problem. So then he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm in here," and then he made amends and so on. But what happened there? Somebody ran into him. He reacted. He reacted impulsively, got angry, and then he had time to consider. And then when he saw what was happening there, he was considering. He gave himself that time to consider what happened here. And then when he could consider, he could then make a decision. He could make a choice of what's the appropriate thing to do. So in a sense, what we're saying here, I'm saying, for harmful emotions, is we need to engage that process, is to be able to recognize, to stop what we're doing. And you could actually say, let's write this over there somewhere. This is a 5-step process when you have emotions. Harmful. The first one is to recognize what's happening. You have this without guilt. Just this is what's going on. What's happening here? Second is you need to stop. Stop it. What's doing. Now there's a technique which I'm going to come back to in the second half, that is used medically, medically, for people who have obsessive problems, you might say. They're obsessive thinking. But this applies also to emotions as well. And this is because some people, they just think again and again and again and again, and they can't get out of the cycle. First you recognize something, and then if you can't immediately get out of it, It's a very simple technique that's taught. Is they say, tell yourself, stop. That's all. It is stop. But say it to yourself. Say it, if you're not disturbing anything, say it loudly. Stop. And if it comes back, stop. And finally, you'll start to say it mentally. Stop. And stop. And it'll stop for a little while. But if you keep repeating that, then it'll begin to extend the amount of time you catch yourself. Because what you're doing is you're catching yourself. You're recognizing and taking action. Stop! Oh, okay. And don't think about it. Just tell yourself to stop. And you will. And then, from there, once you've done that, breathe. So that's number 3. Breathe deeply. Then, reflect. What's happening here? What is happening here? And that's inward introspection. And the 5th and last step is to then choose to do. What's your choice? What am I going to do? And you could say, I guess you could that implies number 6, which is act. But the choice is the important thing, is you make the choice. Now, these 5 steps, which, by the way, at the end, when you leave here today, we'll have handouts, which much of this will be on the handouts. These 5 steps embody the ability to make changes in what you're doing in your life, because this is what we want to do. We don't want to intellectualize it too much. This first half of this class is that, or intellectual, but you don't want to. You want to have action. You want to act. Just as like we mentioned last week, we were talking about fear and worry, is when you recognize it, and I didn't mention this stop, but you stop it, and you put yourself into action, into some sort of positive, considered action, and then you repeat it. Now, this step does not take long. This is in fractions of seconds, actually. You train yourself quickly, and each of them have an important place to be effective. You have to be able to stop, reflect, and choose. Now, that last one, choose, is something I'm also going to come back to, because you can make lots of different choices. You may want to punch the guy in the nose. That's a choice. Not a good one. Not a good one, usually. But so consequently, that has implications too. But if your intentions are in the right direction, you're going to make wise choices. But that is a whole other question. But the ability to choose is what distinguishes us as humans. We can make a choice in life, whereas the dogs and the cows, they don't have much choice. They're just being propelled by instinct. They're being propelled by circumstances, and circumstances are mastering them. But to the degree, if we don't master our circumstances, we are allowing circumstances to master us. And so to just go through life and, whatever happens, and just, some people think, that's a very spiritual way to go about life. It's not. We have to make a choice to align ourselves with something positive, because there's many things in life that can grab hold of us and take us down this direction or that direction. Often, what are these called? Habits. We develop a habit to go in a predilection to go in this direction or that direction. And what we want to do is we want to get to the point where we can take control of our life. Take control of our life. And that taking control is embodied in the word making a choice, learning to make a choice. To make a choice implies to be conscious. Are people conscious? Well, we think we are, but a lot of the time we're really not. We're just daydreaming. We're just reacting. We're just going by what habit has told us to do. And what is our neighbor? Well, I'll just look, what's he doing? And then we do that. And it's not really a considered choice. But to really be conscious means to implies that we are making a choice in life. And there again, that choice is centered in the frontal part of the brain. This is the area where humanity, the human being, it develops. If you lose the ability there, that part for some reason is damaged, you find that you cannot make very easily, you cannot make conscious choice. You have to have that. And so this is what it means to be human. And so what we're really saying here, if we want to overcome harmful emotions, we want to become more human. We want to be able to choose, learn to choose in life. And again, what are those techniques that allow us to be able to make a choice? I'm going to do this, I'm not going to do that, I'm going to act consciously. And then, of course, that larger question, well, what's a better choice versus a lesser better choice? And so this is what we want to do. Now, there's another element that comes into play. And this is we tend to, you could say many of these harmful emotions are rooted, and especially this applies to one we'll talk about this afternoon, it is rooted in the hope and the wish and the desire for things to work out the way we want them to. In other words, when things don't go the way we want them to, what happens? We become angry. We become angry. You could even trace it back. We become fearful. I don't know what's going to happen. We begin to worry about it. Things happen in my life, and perhaps I didn't make the big rich career, and my neighbor did. And now I'm envious of him. And I don't have many friends. That didn't turn out very well, and now I'm lonely. Ego, I don't know, I have to think about that. But then I'm guilty, I'm guilty, I didn't do what I should have hoped I would have done, and oh my God, now. All of them. Life gave us something, and the continual desire to wish something was other than it is. And then again, that comes back, stepping back and looking at life, our lives, what is. Not what we want it to be, just what is. And accepting the fact, not that we're accepting we're not going to do something about it, but accepting the fact that's what is. And to not do that is you're daydreaming. You're wishing, you're living in a wish world. You're living in some other reality. If you cannot, it doesn't mean, I'm not saying you like it. It's not about liking it or disliking it. It's simply recognizing what is. And that very simple ability is at the root also of learning to deal with your emotions, is to being able to accept, yes, and not with guilt, I've got myself in this big fix. And I got really mad, and the reason I'm mad is because whatever, and that's, whose fault is it? Well, it's my fault because I got mad. I didn't have to get mad. I reacted and got mad. So just that reflective ability to accept life as it is the first, you might say, step, a little bit more sophisticated element of learning emotional intelligence. This is a little bit more subtle. But this is also what is needed. I used to, when I was a kid in school, when I was in a schoolboy, I used to be on our school's tennis team. And tennis is an interesting game. You're playing tennis and he hits it, you run and you get it, you hit it back, he hits it, back and forth it goes. But when you're playing tennis, you don't have this thought in your mind, oh, why did you hit it over there? I'm not over there. And then why did you hit it over there? I'm not there. And that's how people approach life sometimes. Why did they hit it over, life hit it over there. Oh, I'm sad. That's ridiculous. When you're playing tennis, you go get it. You go where the ball is hit, and you hit it back. And that's what we have to, that's the approach we have to have. You can't be worrying about what life is giving you. You just take it, and you deal with it. And that dealing with it, you see, is making the choice and responding to it appropriately. And so much energy is wasted in wishing things were other than they are. And that energy could be much better applied in dealing with how things are and doing something about it. I think you all know this, but yet we don't seem to act on it so much, and particularly when it's with harmful emotions. I have this situation, now what am I going to do about it? And so again, it comes back also, many of these things, one reason we act the way we do, we respond the way we don't respond, we react rather than responding. Or even when we respond in habitual patterns, is we're bound by habits. Now I've been referring to different parts of our brain and consciousness. There's two sides to that consciousness that we need to be aware of. One is what typically psychologists refer to it as subconscious mind. It's that part of the mind that controls memory. It controls our habits, you might say. That part you go to sleep at night, and all of those dreams and thoughts, they start to come out. That subconscious part of ourselves, it's non-thinking, you might say, reactive. And sometimes that can be good. We don't have to think too consciously about how to tie shoelaces. It's just something that we just have a pattern. We know how to do it. Many things in life are that. It can be useful, but it often is not useful. And what we do is we create patterns in our life, reactive patterns, that ingrain themselves deeper and deeper into our lives, and we find ourselves controlled by them. And what you could say to overcome harmful emotions is learning to, you might say, elevate our awareness or you might say the controls for us from subconsciousness to consciousness. We want to become conscious and be in command of our subconscious, not the subconscious be in command of us. And this too is something we need to do. Now there's good news and bad news about this. The good news, or you could say the bad news is that these subconscious patterns are controlling, for some people, almost all of their life. You find people, the littlest thing happens to them, they get angry. Somebody bumps into them in the grocery store. Oh, they get like, or on the bus, like I mentioned. They get angry. Some smallest thing, and they just react. They have a pattern in which they react, and they're controlled by it. Now, unfortunately, all of us, to some degree, probably have that going on. So it's, you might say, ubiquitous. The good news is that most of these patterns are not deeply ingrained. Most of them are rather shallow. Because I used to, when I was a schoolboy again, my school was not too far from, so I didn't have to take the bus. That was good. Because it was close enough for me to walk to the school. And I would walk the exact same route every day. You know, I became aware of it after a while, and I said, why don't I walk the other way? You know, so then I started to try to find how many different ways I could walk to school. But many of these things, you walk to school in a certain way, you didn't think about it, it just happened. And so you didn't give it a lot of attention. Or you could say, when that's the case, it's not deeply ingrained, it just happened. Now you've done it long enough so it gets deeper and deeper, but it's not highly, you could change it if you wanted to, like I changed my route when I became aware of this. That was easy. And then I remember Yogananda once there was a story from his life. He came to America in 1920, and he was introduced to lots of different foods and things that he had never been exposed to before. And some of them he didn't like. He didn't like some of them, but he said, well, they were served to him at meals, and so there were certain types of cheeses he had never had before, and there were moldy cheeses, they're very strong tasting cheeses, and he said first time he ate, I think it was Roquefort cheese. He says he put it in. He says, and Mr. Roquefort was not happy in my stomach and wanted to exit immediately. But he says, obviously it was not appropriate. He says, I forced him to stay down. And but on the other side, he was attracted to some things. And one of the things he liked, he was introduced to ginger ale. That soft drink, it's carbonated drink. He says, oh, this is great. I like ginger ale. And so every day, somebody would give him, at a certain time of day, would give him a bottle of ginger ale. And he'd drink the ginger ale. And then one day, this went on for maybe a couple of weeks. And then one day, nobody brought him a ginger ale. And this thought went through his mind, where's my ginger ale? And he said, he says he could see a habit developing right away. And he says, no more, for not Mr. Ginger Ale, no more for you. And then he never had ginger ale again, or at least not in that fashion. But these little things, when they're little, there's not much energy behind them. But there's others. You could say maybe the bad news of that, half of that, some things that are ingrained very deeply because we have intentionally, you might say, we put energy behind it. Those are the ones that are a little bit harder. So you could say that if a little energy went into forming a habit, inadvertently almost, it takes only a little bit of energy to change them. And most of our habits are like that. But there are some habits that we've really ingrained, and those are the ones that are going to take more intense effort. But I would say start with the simple ones first and get rid of those and start to live, because you fight battles that you can win at first. Fight the battles you can win. Then you gain strength. And then when you win those battles, you gain strength to fight the bigger battles. So consequently, so many people I've seen, they come on to meditative path, the yogic path, and they say, oh, I'm going to go for samadhi in 2 years, and they're all enthusiastic, and they say, I want to get rid of all my karma. So Divine Mother, give me all my karma right now. I want it all. That's not a wise thing to do. She might say yes and give it to you, but don't invite those things that you don't. Let it come as its own time. And oftentimes it's like that. Don't go after the big ones immediately. Sometimes the best you can do for a bad habit is just put a fence around it and don't make it worse. And then go after the ones that you can put energy into positively changing, and then slowly you begin to gain strength. And then the time will come. Well, then you can go after those big ones too. So just approach it that way. And if you start making positive directions, you'll find that little by little you'll begin to reach your goal. And so this is what we need to apply also to harmful emotions. If you're subject to anger, well, you may not be able to conquer it all at once, but take the little things, those little habits that induce reactive tendencies in you, and little by little you'll get stronger. And it's for every emotion, it's like that. Do something in a positive direction. This is, I guess you could say, also a secret. Ask yourself, in what, again, comes back to one of the early ones, in what direction am I going? It's not what goal you've reached. This is a lifetime. But am I going in a direction to take me in a positive way, or am I going in a wrong direction? This question comes up so often of what is right action. What's the wise thing to do? What's the best thing to do? What's the right thing to do in life? Or what's the right thing to do to cure my anger or my fear? Well, you cannot say in a defined way always, because it's relative to you have different realities. What you have to ask yourself, do something that takes you in a direction you ultimately want to go. Is it doing that? And if it's doing that, then you ask yourself again tomorrow, you see, and you keep going in that direction. And little by little, you'll cross that road, getting to where you want to go, little by little. So I'm going to leave it to there because I promised, and then we're going to come back and we're going to become more specific. I promised that we'd have a little washroom break. Now, I have to warn you though, I'm sort of the prompt type. So within 5 minutes, we're going to start again. So do please come back in with 5 minutes, or you don't even leave if you don't need to leave. But you'll want to maybe you want to stretch or something, and there's water outside and available. And in 5 minutes, we'll start again. Okay? Okay. So, I've got to get those. I'm going to start telling a story, and because I think as I start talking, people will come back in, and then we're going to proceed. This is an aside. I read an article a couple of years ago, I guess it was, about in America there is a maximum security prison in one of the states in America, and in this prison is held, you might say, some of the most violent prisoners. People have been convicted for murder, and they're there for life sentences, or either that or very long sentences, and you might say, more dangerous prisoners. And so there's a group of Buddhist people from a Buddhist tradition. They practice Vipassana tradition of meditation, and so they went to this prison, and after much discussion, received permission to introduce a meditation regimen to volunteers who were in the prison. And it turned out they started with about a half dozen prisoners. They had, you might say, they had time on their hands, and so they volunteered to take part in this experiment that they did in this project. And they began to teach them meditation techniques. Not difficult ones, easy, simple ones. And very slowly, they found that it became a very popular offering in that prison. Not obviously most of the prisoners were not interested, but a much larger percentage that they anticipated began to participate. And the prison noticed after a year or two, the incident rate of disturbance in the prison, the behavior of the prisoners began to moderate. And it began enough to make a noticeable statistical difference. People began to calm down. And they then did a follow-up, a second study, to find out, interviewing prisoners more closely as to what was happening with these prisoners. And it turns out that one of the big problems with people that got people in prison in the first place is a lack of impulse control. That's what ended up. In other words, somebody did something and they shot them, or whatever it was, they reacted violently, or something, some situation they had difficulty. And you find, they did a study of this in prisons generally, that such folks often you have high incidences of impulse control. Now, I don't think all of those who lack impulse control are in prison. I think to some degree, we all suffer from that to lesser or greater degrees. The inability to control our impulses. And that's at the heart of what we're speaking of here. And what they found is when the prisoners in their interviews asked them what was happening, they said, one of them, I remember one of the comments was that this fellow said, I've been in prison my whole life. Even before he ended up in that physical prison, I've been imprisoned by my impulses. I had no control over what I would do. He says, and this learning to meditate has freed me. I've learned to interject a little small space in my life to allow me to consider what I'm going to do. Now, his habits were such that what he chose to do didn't necessarily was going to be positive always, but that interjection, he said, it just freed him. He says, I felt I had now some control over my life. And the ability to have control over one's life is a very important concept in terms to our sense of happiness. Because one of the reasons that many people are unhappy is they feel they are victims of life itself. And to the degree, whether you're rich or poor or whatever, if you feel as if you're victimized by life, why did it have to happen to me? Why is this? Why is that? Why don't I have any friends? Why, it's somebody else's fault. And it may be somebody else's fault, actually, but how we receive it, you see, how we receive it and that feeling that it gives us that I have no control over what I can do in life and how I can respond to life, that leads to a degradation of our sense of well-being. And we find that it's one of the main causes of unhappiness. If ever we feel that things are outside of ourselves and I have no control to do anything, life begins to lose meaning for people at that point. And if we don't have meaning in some fashion, you see, life becomes useless for us, and people begin to lose heart. So in a sense, just having that a little bit of sense of what can give us control, even in a small way, that we find that starting with the small way eventually we can expand that bigger and bigger. What can we do to have control, not be victimized in that? And victimization is much of it's inside of ourselves. That's not to say outwardly there are forces victimizing us too. But what we do about it, if I can respond to it in some way, well, then I have some control on that. Now, our time is up and we're going to start again. What I'd like you to do, now I actually did a little bit more than 5 minutes. I'd like you to stand up. One is I want us to just stretch a little bit, but I'd like you to just inhale and tense all the muscles in your body and vibrate the whole body. Now, as you inhale, we're going to do this in a special way. We're going to take a double breath, and by that I mean through the nose, and then exhale with a double breath through the mouth and nose. So it gets rid of the breath quickly. So let's just try that. Inhale, hold the breath, and now exhale. Now inhale, this time hold the breath and tense. Tense, throw the breath out, relax. Once more, inhale, throw the breath out, relax. Now this one, be careful because we're tight in here, but I'd like you just gently, as space allows you, I'd like you to just allow your body just to go forward a little bit, like this. And relax. Now, obviously, if we had lots of space, you could go all the way down, but you don't need to do that. Just allow yourself to, in a relaxed way, to fall forward. And relax in that position. Now, as you inhale, I'd like you to come up slowly and begin tensing the body from the feet, the calves, the legs, the hips, the thighs, stomach, and abdomen. As you come up, and we're going to raise our arms up above our body until the whole body is tensed and reaching up. Like this. And tense. And then relax. Go back down. Come up again. And tense. And relax down. Once more. Inhale. Double breath. Tense. And relax down. And assume a normal posture. And now let's be seated. Now this is more than just an exercise to stimulate a little bit of tension and relaxation in the body. Remember where we started, that idea of up versus down, a posture affecting our mood and our attitude. There's much truth to that, something very simple. If you find yourself in a bad mood, or let's put it this way, if you find yourself controlled or in the grips of a harmful emotion, let's put it that way, do that. The use of the body, you're stimulating an upward flow of life force in the body. And then you're relaxing down, it's as if you're pulling it up. And you'll find that this movement of up is directing life force up the body, up toward the brain. And you'll find that something like that is just can be very, very helpful. At the same time, as just generally, if you learn to bring your attention here, at the point between the eyebrows, and generally learn to respond and react to situations in life by bringing your attention consciously to this point, you'll also help create. Actually, these are on our handout, so I don't need to write them. You will learn to bring your attention consciously more to the forward part of your brain. Very subtly, this is one of the things that's happening. And as you do that, as you keep your attention, bring your attention consciously to this point in the head, you'll begin to interject that little bit of space to begin to make a conscious decision afterwards. Okay. Keep bringing it back to this point. Now, in terms of yoga philosophy, this point in the head is known as the Kutashta center. It's a positive pole of a chakra center point here in the back of the head, the medulla. And this is said to be the center of higher consciousness. It's associated by putting your attention at this point, you're stimulating. Wherever you put your attention, you're going to cause some stimulation there, just mentally even. Now, physically, you can stimulate that further, but putting your attention here will stimulate this part of the brain. And if you can learn just generally in life to act from this point, the seat, you might say, of awareness, you'll start to find that you'll stimulate that away from the emotional side of just reactive, and you can make conscious decisions. It's subtle, but it'll help. So whatever we do to bring that life force up, you'll change your mood very quickly. And just that little exercise like that. Now I want to finish that a little bit before I go back to these tools, of fear and anger. Finish that discussion this morning. The point here it is, right. I said, just so I don't leave it hanging, I said we want to learn to make conscious choices. Become conscious so that you can make good choices, but to choose. That interjects that space. And I was mentioning that a little before how prisoners had learned to do this. But they didn't talk about making a good choice afterwards, what might be a better choice. But we know in life there are some choices are better than others. I hope I don't have to convince you of that. And you might say, what are the better choices? Well, obviously, those choices that are going to take you toward what your goal is in life. Now, there again, we'd have to look in terms of some goals are better than other goals. They lead to more success. Success being what we as humans really want. We want to be happy. We want to be emotionally, spiritually, intellectually happy, successful, all of these things. That's another discourse, not this one. But we want to go in that direction. So we want to learn to make choices and draw and go in the direction that's going to lead us to success. Well, to be conscious is one thing, but there's another higher level that I would like to introduce, a concept that there's a higher level of awareness than just the conscious mind. There's a sense of expanded awareness. Spiritual traditions, yogic traditions all speak of a spiritual or a broader, expanded state of awareness that we want to tap into. And to bring this down to you might say, a common language level, certainly what we can do is to be able to make good choices, is to learn to awaken our intuition in life. There's a faculty within each of us that is intuitive, and this is a higher than the conscious mind. That intuitive faculty where we draw inspiration to do something higher. Now, if we attune ourselves, or if we can, that is a muscle, just like other muscles, is learning to awaken the intuition. And when we speak, often when we see, people speak of intuition in common language, but you could say that too is a feeling in the heart. You know, if I were to ask you, where do you feel intuition? Well, it's my heart tells me. Now, for most people, or for people with harmful emotions, their heart might be telling them something that's totally emotional. But there's a subtler level when we speak. Well, I just have a sense of knowing that there's something else there. And you can see this when we learn to purify those emotional sides, there's that side of our heart, the feelings that draw us out and down, and we realize, we should realize there's a positive side of those feelings as well, and this is, you might say, the intuitive side. That inner sense of well-being, an inner sense of guidance that can be developed that is not based upon the senses. If you were to turn off all of your senses of sight, touch, hearing, taste, would you still not be conscious? Would consciousness disappear? Now, some people might say yes, no, but you would still be, even though your senses were not there. But how that knowing is, you could say, your intuition, that sense of that's not dependent upon any sensory input. It's just that knowing. And you begin to develop that and clarify that. And then that, when we start to tap into that, then we begin to draw guidance that's not from a lower level. It's from a higher level, and we begin to draw intuitive guidance. And this is what all of us want. Now, in the meantime, there are other things we can do. There's the story of the young boy who went to his grandfather and said, "Grandfather, you're so wise. How did you get to be so wise?" And he said, "Well, oh gosh, I'm forgetting how it went." He says, "Well, by learning, I learned little by little what to do, what's the right thing to do." And then he says, "Well, how did you learn what's the right thing to do?" And he says, "Well, by doing all the things that were not the right thing to do." Or something like that. I didn't tell that story as well as I could have, but the idea being experience. We learn through experience, But yet, little by little, we also can learn from wise counsel of other people's experience. And whatever it is, we learn to make good choices. But in the end, it's going to come down from the inside, learning and being able to attune ourselves to some higher guidance that comes from inside. And that comes from learning to turn off the outside. And this is also a fruit of meditation that comes. But now I'd like to segue to two topics, that one of which we talked about last week at our workshop last week on fear and worry. And I want to be a little more specific. And I have these handouts, which I'll be handing out to everybody at the end of the class. We'll have them, you can take them. But there's some suggestions here, that some things that you could do that I'd like to go over. One of the things that we did already is, if you have, this is for fear and worry, but it could be applied, like I say, to all negative emotions, is tense and relax and breathe, tense and relax. And I did that little exercise with you. That immediately in itself brings to a pause, because much of our reaction and harmful emotions, they have different elements to them. They have a physical element, they have a mental element, a spiritual element to them, and we have to address them. We're more successful if we address them on all levels. So on a physical level, we realize that when we're in the grips of a harmful emotion, there's certain chemical processes that are happening within ourselves. And if we can, again, detach ourselves and just look impersonally, yes, this is happening to me. I'm in the grips of something. I'm aware. I'm angry, or I'm fearful. What do? Stop, tense, relax, breathe. That's, you might say, the first thing to do. And then try to put yourself physiologically back to a state of neutrality. I've just mentioned this double breathing exercise. There's very simple ones. If you were to combine a physical movement with a mental affirmation, you engage the mind. If you're fearful, if you're worrying, do something physical and engage the mind in something positive. And this is oftentimes the repetition of something that's a repetitive phrase. For example, we here in Ananda Sangha, we have a little exercise people do sometimes, is they'll walk in place. If something, so you could even do this. I'm not going to ask you now, but if you could do this, walking in place. And if you're fearful, it engages the body, and you could say, I'm awake and ready. I'm awake and ready. Or I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. Or whatever you choose to say that is affirmative in counter to whatever it is you're doing. If you incorporate affirmations, thoughts, with physical actions, you can begin to change your attitudes. And when you change your attitudes, now this, you're going to have to take this on faith and believe, because this is a deep subject, you might say philosophically. But there's something happens in the body. There is, in the yogic tradition, we would speak about different energy centers in the body, chakras, these sorts of things. But these chakras, these energy centers in the body are polarized. There's positive and negative poles to them. And the positive pole is basically, the energy is flowing through that chakra in an upward direction. Then energy is flowing through that chakra or in a negative direction. Positive, negative pole. And when you find that when energy is flowing positively through a chakra, there is a positive attitude associated with the attitudes that are identified with the different chakra centers. They vary depending upon the chakra level. But when there's a positive flow through it, you have a positive attitude. that's associated with that energy center. But in reverse, it also happens. If you stimulate a positive attitude artificially, let's say, by affirmation, by action, this is actually the underlying secret also of Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga stimulates a chakra in a positive way. You find that movement starts to go up, and you find that the attitude changes. Attitudes are just simply which direction is the energy moving at a certain point in the body. And you can trace this back, and this is deeper science, but you could trace it back to that, and if you change that energy flow, you begin to change the attitude itself and the mental thoughts. And there's a principle in yoga that the mind follows the heart. The principle of life, really. The mind follows the heart. In other words, the feelings, if the feelings are positive, you feel there's an upward movement of feeling, you're going to have positive thoughts. If you have negative feelings that are downward flowing, you're going to have thoughts that reinforce them. And people like to think it's the other way around. Well, I don't, I think, and that's what determines what I feel. But no, it's what you feel that determines what you think, generally the case. So do something that stimulates artificially an upward flow, and you'll begin to attract positive thoughts. It's in reverse, and you can use this principle. It's a basic principle. Obviously, this positive and negative I mentioned is related to, it's a magnetic principle of magnetism. If you find if your magnetism is pulling in a certain direction more than the other direction, and you want to change that, if you're a person who is fearful, with whom should you associate? People who are courageous, who do not have that fear. And you'll find that you begin to take on the magnetism of your environment. People of stronger magnetism will affect you the most, but environment generally, again, a basic principle of life, environment is stronger than willpower. Put yourself in a good environment that supports what you're wanting to do, and you go into a corporate world, and all of a sudden you become corporate. It just happens. You associate in the artist quarter, and pretty soon you're like an artist. And it happens. And your friends are your biggest influence, probably. Who do you associate with, and what are they interested in? You find yourself becoming interested in that too. So put yourself in the environment that allows you to succeed in what you want to do. We're more than, I think, especially when you talk about fear and worry, we're more than this physical body. I think one of the problems with fear is we worry and we associate very much with physical bodies. What happens to this body? What happens if somebody does something and I get sick or I get injured? And these are valid concerns, but at the same time, if it's your only concern, then you're in trouble. Because then if this body goes, you go. But we're more than this physical body. And this is on many levels, where there's an emotional side to us, there's a psychological side to us, but literally also there's an energetic side to us. And worst comes to worst, this body goes, well, what happens then? Well, now that of course depends on what you believe, doesn't it? But I personally believe that's not the end. I mean, I probably get another one, and I'll trade it in. And God will give me another one. But there again, I think that this is not the end. This physical body is not the end all and be all of who we are. There's a larger reality going on. I think also so much of fear and anger depends upon magnetism. Life itself depends on magnetism. Fear is destructive because it makes us contractive. I think one of the first principles that we said that the problem with harmful emotions is it makes us contract. We become less, because we're identified with this little body, we become contractive, we become protective, we become smaller than what we could be. And to the degree that we can counter that with being larger and expansive, and fear makes us contract. And whenever you have that, you're going to be unhappy. There's a general principle too. Whenever you are expanding, you're going to feel joyful and happy. Whenever you're contracting, the tendency is to be unhappy. And so be expansive in your thinking, be expansive in your attitudes, be expansive in your approach to life. You're more likely to be happy. Contraction, fear contracts, and inevitable result, we're unhappy. So what can you do to be expansive? I think when fear is a worry, visualize positive outcomes for whatever it is you're facing. I think the power of the mind is to, you might say sometimes, just to overcome that natural tendency to think the worst. Oh my God! And isn't that really what worry is about? The worst might happen, or it's going to happen. If we learn to visualize, instead counter that with positive outcomes, we begin to at least attract that potential within us. And that's really, I think, a beginning. It may not always influence the result, but at least if you visualize it, you're not going to be attracting those negative outcomes to you, because you tend to become magnetized in that way. So see it that way, and you'll find subtly your actions will be directed that way. Mega started off with say yes to life. I like that. That's a nice saying. Say yes to life. By that, meet life rather than retreat from life. Something's coming toward you. You've got a choice. You're passive and wait till it comes, run away from it, or go out and meet it. And I think going out and meeting it is your best solution. Most of the time. Use common sense. But like he was talking about in the case of nervousness about speaking, that go out and meet it if you do it. Obviously, if the tiger's coming down the path, well, go up the tree. But never. I think you understand what we're saying. Is go out and meet your tests that are coming. Go out and meet your challenges. Go out and get the ball when life hits it over the net in your court. Go get it. Rather than, and this is saying yes to life, and you somehow, Swami Kriyananda used to, in the same vein, he would say that, he would say there was times in his life when he was very lucky. And he said, one, you could say that's just karma, but two, he said he found that those times when he was really lucky in life, things worked out, he was willing to go out and meet luck halfway. He would go toward it, and he would expect to be lucky. And he would find that if you go toward it and you meet life, that somehow life responded and he would draw it. But when he had this other expectation, it somehow eluded him. Now, is that superstition? Well, try it, is what I'd see. Meet love like luck halfway. But this is the same, this is an extension of saying yes to life, being positive, being affirmative. You give yourself power when you do that, is what happens. You become more powerful. And when you become more powerful, you have a sense of in control as opposed to being a victim of life. And when you're in control, you begin to influence your environment. You have an influence on what goes on around you. And something may come and it's going to hit you, your karma is going to come, but it just glances. If you're strong, it doesn't knock you over. So say yes to life. Then, again, I mentioned this one earlier. Whatever comes, let it come. This was Swami Kriyananda's motto, and one of his mottos in life. He says, whatever come, let it come. I'm going to deal with it. And it's not a matter of being passive. But he says, look, life is big, life is long, lots of things come, let it come. And I'm ready and to take care of it. And if you have that attitude, sometimes life leaves you, the bad things leave you alone because they know they're not going to bother you. And often I've found that to be the case, dealing with difficult, fearful situations in life. If you're fearful of them, they chase you, like dogs. They chase you. But you turn around and face them, and they back off. And that's how it is with life in general, and oftentimes with any harmful emotion. You face it, look it in the face, and you say, okay, that's what it is, I'm going to deal with it. Have that attitude of courageous acceptance and facing it, not passivity. I'm not saying that word's not allowed. Not being passive, but being perhaps still and quiet, but with courage. You see, and okay, play the game particularly with fear and worry. Play the game of what if. What if? Oh my God! What if that happened? What would happen then? What if this? What if that? Again, combining it with let it come, and then what if it did come? Can you deal with it? Then work out a strategy. Okay, if I should lose my job, what would I do? If that worries you, play it out and see if you can come up with a solution. Because again, by playing it out, you're putting in positive motion, direction. You're putting energy out. You're dealing with it. You're responding. And again, yes, if you were there last week, Vasudha talked about worry fast, and I won't go into that. But for those who weren't here, you fast with the meal, from food, fast from worry. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15, keep on building it up. And you'll find, it's just an addiction. Worry is an addiction. It's a state of mind that you can break yourself of it with little bit of effort. Again, very quickly, I'm going to say meditation, prayer, releasing your attachments, build a mental fire, throw them into the fire, service, serving other people. When harmful emotions, you start dwelling on it, this is what comes down to ego too. We become self-absorbed. Who are we thinking about? Me. I'm this, I'm afraid, I'm that, I'm lonely, I'm this. It's all about me. And and we suffer when that happens. It doesn't mean the circumstances are not, they're there. But we suffer. But to the degree we think about too much ourselves, if you can take your mind by serving others and having a positive flow, doing something constructive, you begin to, all of a sudden, that begins to wash away. And it allows you, because of your positive putting action into motion, it allows you to come up with constructive solutions to what your situation is. So it's not about burying them. It's about being in a positive flow and to respond to them. Surround your body. If you find yourself in a negative environment, a threatening environment, let's say, surround your body with an aura of light. You can use your hands like this, touching them here, touching them here. Om Tat Sat, Om Tat Sat, or something positive. There's many different mantras you can use. Om Tat Sat, and just visualize a light. Somebody threatening comes to you, you meet somebody that a little bit fearful person, see that person in light. See yourself in light. Look, Yogananda had a very interesting comment once. He said, if somebody threatens you, look at them, don't look in their eyes. Don't look in their eyes. Eyes are very magnetic, and a threatening person will demagnetize you, you might say. He says, but look at the point between the eyebrows here. They won't know the difference. Look right there. He says, and see a blue light in that person at that point. Visualize a blue light at that point. He says, it'll help you. It'll help you, and it'll help neutralize your situation. We talked about, of course, being in the Om vibration last week, I believe, at our discussion. But if you can summon the Om, as Yogananda said, when you're in Om, nothing can touch you. Nothing can touch you. And if you're a disciple of a particular path, like in our path, they say that if you have a guru, the guru, truly a Satguru who has control of these things, the Satguru will be there to meet you when your time of death comes. So don't worry. What's to worry? What's to worry? But that's you might say an answer on a little deeper level. But so it was, and the gurus of our path said, now when the time comes and you're going to pass, they'll be there to meet you, take you, whatever. So don't worry. And you could say, why worry about something that's inevitable anyway? Some people worry about death. It seems a rather somewhat of a waste of energy to worry about things you can't avoid. So, and finally, on the spiritual level, love is the greatest antidote. If you love, how can you be afraid of it? That which you love, you can't be afraid of that which you love. So to the degree that you can feel love in your heart for the world, for other people, strangers, you can't be afraid of that. And then, so consequently, the world tends to respond in equal measure. But I'm running out, but I want to jump to anger quickly. Again, I mentioned earlier that idea of the stop technique. That works with anger also. Just stop if you find yourself getting angry. Just stop. And then keep repeating that until you can stop. If you recognize anger coming up in yourself, it's an emotion. This too applies to other emotions. Do something. Exit the situation. I think that's probably the first thing to do. Exit the situation that's stimulating your anger. If it's more than just a mild irritation, get out and just go for a walk. Remove yourself from the situation, and you can find yourself being drawn into it. Breathe, exercise, do something physical, divert your attention. All of these, if you can I think the important principle here is directing yourself in a positive direction, because anger will pass. All of these harmful emotions tend to be transitory, and you have to give that emotion time to play itself out, and in the meantime, putting yourself in a position where you're not going to make the situation worse. I think that's probably the first thing to do. Don't intellectualize it. Act in a positive way. Put yourself in a positive way. And remember, thoughts follow the heart. You're going to find all the reasons why you should be angry. It's because all of these reasons. That's not really, when you're angry is not the time to resolve. The first step is when you're angry is to get out of the angry mood, get out of the angry situation. Then, when everything's calmed down, then you can begin to think about it. Because when you're in a calm mood, different thoughts will begin to come. Same situation, different thoughts. Get yourself into the positive mood by removing, and then consider what can be done here, and then take the appropriate action. You could say that stop technique that I mentioned, what is being done there is the tendency to react to any harmful emotion is sometimes very compelling. You just want to do. But if you can learn to delay the impulse to react, and then do it again, and do it again, repetitively, delay the reactive process until enough time passes and it begins to calm down, you're gaining control. Control is what we want, is to be able to control the impulse that is causing us to act. And so it's just a matter of not curing it right away, but delaying it, Put a little delay in there. That's why that's the basis of that old saying of count to 10. What you're doing, and then count again, and then count again, until finally you get to the point where, okay, then you're going to do something positive or constructive. Have we ever mentioned humor? Sometimes if you have the ability to laugh at yourself, whatever the emotion might be. And of course, I mentioned bringing in environment, bringing in company, positive company. But if you're a spiritual devotee, you realize also there's a larger company at play also, because we try to respond to our problems in life strictly from our own power alone. And to that degree, we have to start somewhere, and we start with our own power, but there's a larger power at play also in this world. That harmful emotions, perhaps one of their more insidious effects is they separate us from that larger reality. They separate us. Harmful emotions, they have the potential to they degrade our relationships. They cause us to be separate from other people, but they also separate us from a larger reality as well. And the reason is again, comes back to my friends here at the very beginning, mentioning our ego. We're associated with the body. We're thinking, I am separate from you. I am separate from this world around me. And ultimately, we separate ourselves from one another, and we separate ourselves from the larger divine reality in which we live, and by identifying with our little me self. And I think all harmful emotions do that. They pull us in and contract. But that separation, you could say, overcoming that separation and remembering that we're not separate. There is a larger power also at play in this world. And if we can learn to draw on that higher power and make that connection, keep that connection strong, we find that we're not alone in responding to the difficult things that happen to us, the emotions that come. We draw on that power. And of course, I'm speaking about one or perhaps two powers there. If you're a disciple of a spiritual tradition, drawing on the Guru's grace, the Guru's power, and of course, the larger power, God's power, and this divine power that sustains us. And if you have that relation is strong within you, what can touch you? That was the essence of what Yogananda was saying. He says, when you're in Om, nothing can touch you. And that Om being an expression of the divine power. But however you conceptualize that, if we can make that a reality, not just a mental, you might say, concept, but wherever we are, we start where we are, make that a reality of our life, and we'll find that harmful emotions can't touch us. Maybe they touch us a little bit, but they don't have a hold upon us. And so this, you could say, is the ultimate cure for harmful emotions.